Are they actively trying to engineer the end times?
For I'll be with you, even in you, to the end of the world.
They are going to bring the word of God that is being preached in the cult here in Sherwood Park to the 144,000. They are going to accept it, but they're going to have to die first.
Is that true? Then it's sin to disbelieve.
Breanna Brown was born into an evangelical Christian cult and spent 26 years trying to live up to impossible spiritual standards that ultimately controlled every single aspect of her life. She was excommunicated. She begged her way back. Her whole world was molded by this apocalyptic theology. The group was in Alberta, Canada, and the belief was that the unholy would spend an eternity in hell. The cult controlled her mind, told her what music she could and mostly couldn't listen to, what to wear, how to not tempt men, and restricted her education to only what the pastor wanted her to read. She married another member of the cult at 19 and had 5 children until she escaped, shedding all of her previous ties to family and friends. Now, broadly speaking, she has entered into the ranks of the evangelicals. Now, for people who've been following this channel, you might remember a video I did with Josiah Hesse about a year ago on a similar theme. Keep going, man. But I have to tell you that this conversation, it takes some unexpected turns. I just got finished recording it, and I mean, we're talking not only about like apocalyptic theology and sort of the way our politics work now, but we're talking about like breeding special cows to usher in the apocalypse and how her world, like even wearing like special kinds of glasses, could doom everything around her. She's got this great blog called notamommyblog. It's on Substack, and you have to check it out. But where this conversation starts and where it goes, oh man, just stay to the end. You're gonna be really surprised. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me today, Breanna. All right, so let's just go get like big picture context for a second, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what the evangelical movement is all about, especially its modern and sort of more remote iterations. You wrote that you're the 3rd generation member of this cult. And can you tell me who Minister William Branham is?
William Branham is what we call a 20th century prophet. He was claimed to be born in 1909. However, those claims have been disproven. It's been documented he's been born in 1907, 1908, or 1909. So from the start there, it's been lies. He was a part of the original 150 men and women who started the evangelical movement, going on to become the #1 healing revivalist in America. His mentor was Roy E. Davis, who was the founder of the KKK.
Oh my God.
And fun fact, Jim Jones, the massacre of Jim Jones, Jim Jones was a disciple of William Branham. So he has ties to some of the biggest evangelical.
Hey, Future Scott here. I just wanted to say that we got confused about a few small facts here regarding the amazing array of different cults. And we sort of went back and forth trying to figure out which cult we were going to talk about. Don't worry about it. I just shortened it. Here we go. So here's what we've learned here in this last second is that there are a lot of crazy evangelical groups that have led to massacres in various ways.
Yes.
So Jim Jones, what he did, he was a San Francisco preacher who eventually moved down to Guyana. He was considered a liberal in the beginning. And then in Guyana, he killed a U.S. congressman and a bunch, and I think like 180 of his members who literally drank cyanide in
Yes.
And then David Koresh was the guy who was like child molesting, and the FBI or ATF drove tanks through his front door, and it was a whole mess. And the reason why we're bringing these people up is because you were in a group that is spiritually descended from the madness that happened.
Like the leader, William Branham, essentially like mentored and was mentored by these men.
Yeah. And I've gone through like the Google pages of William Branham, because I don't really I like I'd heard the name before, but
Mhm.
when you go down to like the scandals section, which is like my favorite part of every Wikipedia page, it was like it's like this guy who was studied under was pedophilia. This guy had murders in Africa. This guy, and there's like 30 names that
Mhm.
show up of just crazy things that have happened with sort of this charismatic, cult following. And Branham, he was sort of popular in I guess you could say that. Would you say the 40s to the 60s? Is that right?
I would say, yeah, the 40s to the 60s, that was his healing revivals. However, the cult I am from under Terry Sproul,
Mhm.
we didn't focus on the healing revivals.
Mhm.
So Branhamites around the world, there's about 5,000 churches, cults, if you will, that believe in William Branham. The
Mhm.
cult I am from, we are known as an extremist sect within William Branham. So William Branham historians, actually, when I've spoken to them, they can't relate to my story because they have no understanding of what was being preached in this extremist sect that I came from. So we didn't focus on the 40s to the 60s. We focused on from what William Branham did from the 60 to 65 before he was killed in a car crash.
As I recall from his Wikipedia article, in that time period, you actually had a lot of people in the evangelical movement sort of distancing themselves from Branham, because they thought that he was essentially, off script. He was
Yes,
making up.
exactly. They what they claim is that he went off.
Mhm.
So William Branham said that there were three messengers in that came to the church. So Oral Roberts,
Mhm.
Billy Graham, and William Branham.
Mhm.
William Branham, we were taught that Oral Roberts and Billy Graham were the false prophets in the 20th century, and William Branham was the voice of God and was the chosen prophet of
Okay.
so William Oral Roberts and Billy Graham came to Sodom and they ministered to Sodom. So Billy Graham, like we know, he went to all the president, like he went to presidents. He spoke all around the world. He's one of the most famous, if not the most famous, evangelical of modern times.
Mhm.
But William Branham, in the end, he separated himself. So he saw a vision. So William Branham saw visions all the time. But one of his final visions that he saw, he claimed that the angel of the Lord came to him in his bedroom at 6 a.m. when he was sitting there with his wife.
One night I was praying in my room. I noticed there was a light on the floor. The pillar of fire was hanging just above. He was throwing the light on the floor. And he said to me, "Fear not." And as soon as I heard that voice, I knew it was the same voice that had always spoke to me, but the first time I'd ever seen him in human form.
And he talked about the three pulls. So the first pull was the healing revivals.
Woman, make her well, Father. May she go from here tonight and be made completely whole. In Jesus Christ's name I ask it.
The second pull was he could discern the secrets of your heart. And the third pull was it was going to be a secret. And his verbiage, his actual language was, we were going to go into the closet while everyone else was going out of the closet.
I've accepted him as my Savior. That's good. But have you accepted him as your Lord? To be ruler over you, to rule you, to guide you, to walk into that door of your private life and clean the closet out. Take his own blood and paste it on the walls.
And so he was killed and he didn't get to have the third pull ministry, but that is when Billy Graham and Oral Roberts and evangelical ministers began to say that he went off because he stopped going to America. He stopped going around the world doing missions, doing the healing revivals, and he brought it secret. Like he just wanted it to be like he said it was like going to be just in a tent. So that is where what we come from with Terry Sproul is we didn't do missions. We didn't go around the world. We didn't do healing. It was just we were the chosen 500 people because William Branham said there was going to be 700. And so we believed we were that chosen 700 that William Branham spoke about in his last days.
And so when you say the chosen 700, these you are the people who might go to heaven, is that right?
Yeah, so we'll be in the New Jerusalem. So like heaven is a broad term, but we would be the ones inside the gates. So I mean, we were raised that if someone from the world were to give us a glass of water, they would have a place, but not in the New Jerusalem, but like outside of the gates. They wouldn't be in the pits of hell, but they wouldn't be celebrating eternity like we would with Jesus.
Which is a great reason for when a Jehovah's Witness comes to your door. You should offer them some water just to hedge your bets, right? Just to hedge the bets.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is where when your Wikipedia wasn't wrong, but that from 1960 so he saw that William Branham in 1962, that is when he made that switch to go secret and not to go back into America, and Billy Graham continued on. And actually, William Branham believed in numerology. I don't know if you read about that, but he claimed that his last name had 7 letters. Mm-hmm. Graham had 6. 6 is the number of man, as we know, 666, Satan, if you want to go with modern times. But 7 was the number of completion. So William Branham believed that he was the prophet brought here by God himself to complete like what he came here on earth to do.
I have so many questions about theology from this because, you know, one thing you said, 2 of these Oral Roberts and were preaching to Sodom. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
The world.
Sodom. So like Sodom and Gomorrah, not the town, but the
no, not the
world.
town. So Sodom is everything outside of like the message of outside of what the cult we came from. So the world, you know, America, Canada, politics, LGBTQIA communities, like everything outside of those walls is Sodom.
Oh man. Okay, so everyone is like destined to hell, I'm assuming, and then you have this little walled garden where you have the chosen folks who can go to the next level, and then Branham was like. You said it was a secret. He would only do it in a tent. And why was that secret so important? And what was the secret, if you know it?
It was just like the word of God. The word of God in the end time, in that third pull, is the big secret. So the unpardonable sin, as I talk about on my blog, it's not murder, it's not rape, it's not any of those things. Those are all forgivable. It's unbelief. So for someone like me who knows that the word of God, like the end time word of God is being preached, the fact that I deny it and I'm living in Sodom, I've committed the unpardonable sin. I am unforgivable.
Wow. Oh my God. So, you know, Breanna, I just want to tell you were definitely in a cult.
Thank you. Thank you for the confirmation.
Wow. That's a common theme in a lot of the groups that I've listened to is, you know, you have this one or reality. I look at Buddhist cults a lot, but there's like this one, the ultimate truth. And ultimately, if you like betray your guru in the Buddhist cults, that's the worst thing you can do. Mm-hmm. It's not murder. It's not lying. In fact, lying is okay if it brings more people into your fold. And oh, wow. Okay. So
but to on your point of bringing people into the fold, we weren't doing that. They don't want anybody new here. So like other message churches, like I said, out of the 5,000, they're still doing that. They still want to bring people in. They are still doing missions. They still go to camp meetings. The one here in Sherwood Park where I come from, we didn't do that. When I was born, like that was all stopped a long time ago. I was never a part of missions or all of those things. It had become that secret that it was just us and the chosen few. And that's what I was raised in for 26 years.
And as the third generation of this,
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. So tell me about Terry Sproul. What is his theology and so you're considered an extremist in an already sort of, to my view, an extremist group. Yeah. So tell me what about him made him even further out there?
Okay. So he went to theology school, like he went to in the 60s. And it was the early 70s when someone witnessed to him a William Branham tape of one of William Branham's sermons. And he tells a story that he stopped in his tracks and he felt a calling. And he started in his basement with 6 other couples, the cult, what it is now. And over the years, I mean, he went and he talked to other message preachers. He was known as he led these meetings around the world. Everyone loved him. He was very charismatic man. And then I'm third generation. So it was actually my grandpa, my mom's dad. I never got to meet him. He passed away when my mom was 16. But he was raised Pentecost his whole life. And William Branham preached Pentecost for most of his career. And then he switched to, after he heard the angel of the Lord, went private. But my grandpa went to one of these meetings, and it was I can't remember what year it was. I think it was in the 80s. And he heard Terry preach. And Terry, again, at this point, he had been hearing things about Terry. He was off, but he was very he was going this way out of what the other message preachers were doing. And what he was preaching is something called Perusia, which means that Jesus is already here. So Jesus isn't coming back to earth. He's here in our midst now. And other message preachers did not believe that. They still believed that Jesus is going to come back one day. Mm-hmm. And my grandpa heard this, and he said that he had to make the switch from the message church that he was in to Terry Sproul's. And that separated Terry from the rest of, that made us extreme in...
So when Jesus is here, is that like in Islam where Ali is still possibly around? What is
So Terry Sproul is God's mouthpiece.
Oh, Terry Sproul is Jesus.
Is God's mouthpiece. So God speaks through him twice on Sundays and every Wednesday night.
Is there a schedule? Like God shows up at 8:35 p.m. and
So I mean, it's wild because I'll put it this way. So when I got married in the cult at 19, and my ex-husband and I went on our honeymoon, we had to be sure we were back before the next Sunday service because God was going to be in our midst.
Wow, how did that feel to be in the presence of God?
Oh, I mean, you want to talk about God complex. I mean, we had it to the extreme. We were the chosen ones. I remember walking down the aisle, going to communion and thinking, out of 7 billion people, I am one of the chosen people on this planet that God picked. It's not even quantifiable. It's really hard to explain. It's favoritism on steroids. I mean, we would walk around because we don't live on a commune, right? We live in a community. I live right in the middle of Sherwood Park. But you go to grocery stores, you drive down the street, and you think to yourself, you're trash. You're going to hell. I am safe. I am chosen. I remember I went on a trip to Israel, and we can talk about this and along in our podcast. When I was in the young people group, I was 17. And I remember flying on the plane and just thinking, because Terry was with me, we would never die. Because he was God's mouthpiece. That's the protection that I felt continually throughout my life.
It's so fascinating to hear exactly what you're saying because, in anthropology, so that's where sort of my background is, there's this question of habitus, and habitus is a word for the physical practices that you might do in any religious service that reinforce your beliefs. So if you think in Christian prayer, you're kneeling, you have your hands like that bodily practice actually influences the way you cognitively understand the world and believe things. And so what you're describing, this sort of almost sense of overwhelming euphoria, is that on steroids. It's almost the way you describe it almost sounds to me like you're on a drug.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's like I said, it's non-quantifiable, but when you are told you are the chosen one of the one and only God, right? We didn't believe in other gods. We didn't believe in, I will say it right here, we were Trump supporting, we were racist, bigots, all those things. So when you are told you are chosen of the one and only God and your eternity in heaven is going to be, just you and this chosen people, there is nothing that tops it. I've never done drugs, so I don't know what that would feel like, but that is the euphoria that you feel constantly. You go there and it's solidified, it's reassured every service. And that is why with the fear of being kicked out and going into Sodom and starting a new life is absolutely paralyzing. It's terrifying. And as you read in my blog, I've told stories of how I felt that I've been going to be killed or die or kill other people for just living my life outside of it.
Yeah, and like just to highlight for the listeners here right now, not a mommy blog. It's on Substack. Go. There's a link in the description right below, right down there, and go subscribe. I subscribe. I think it's great. It's really fun. Fun. Is it fun to follow your? It's not fun. It's not fun to follow your journey, but I think it's fascinating
Thank
to
you.
follow your journey. And yeah, and like that sort of intoxication. That overwhelming intoxication that you felt when I'm hearing it, I'm like, that sounds groovy. Like, wouldn't I like to be like like in this wonderful place? But like there were cracks, right? You might have that high during these euphoric moments in when God's scheduled
Like
time.
if I could say, like, a euphoric moment is in 2003, we started having something called an after service. And so that was when the first time Terry claimed that the Spirit of the Lord moved in our midst. And we all made our way down to the front. And at this point, because our original building, church building, had burnt down. So we were in hotels around Sherwood Park and Edmonton. So we made our way down to the front of the hotel, the room that we were in, and we stayed there for hours. And our arms were raised, and we were praying, and we were crying, and people were hugging. And from that point on, every Sunday night, we had what was called an after service. And you want to talk about euphoria. I mean, in these moments, we believed at any given time, God was going to come. We were going to feel that final pinch, and we were like, life was going to be over here on earth, and we were going to be in the New Jerusalem. God was going to burn the earth as we know it, and then create the New Jerusalem, which was here on earth, and everyone else would be in hell, right? So we would do that every Sunday night, and women were not allowed to pray, right? Women were not allowed to have a place or a voice, only men. So like the men would pray out, we would sing songs, and you never knew, like we lived in doomsday, right? We had that fear. So you didn't know if it was going to be that Sunday night that was going to be the day. I always tell the story, but I was a mom. I was a very young mom, and if I didn't have one kid, I had 3 kids or I had 5, but I would always be up there, in the aisle of the sanctuary and just be thinking about a Big Mac. I was so hungry. It's just like, I just want to go and eat. So while these men are praying for, and I'm supposed to be praying for the ending of our mortal lives, I was like craving a hamburger from McDonald's. Yeah. But that was the euphoria that we believed we could not die physically. That became after Terry Sproul's wife became really sick with cancer. He started preaching that we cannot die, and anyone who became sick after her, they go out on a limb of faith. They cannot die. We become so soaked up in that, and then we can't die spiritually. So it's a bunch of, as I call it, bullshit. But when you're in it, you're brainwashed, and this is what you're so focused on in your everyday life, is that this next Sunday evening, maybe a day during the week, is going to be your final day here in mortal life.
So I want to go backwards to one detail that you just sort of let drop, because I think this might point to some sort of amazing cognitive dissonance. Is that you said that we couldn't pray where we usually did because our church burned down, and I would think, if I was a very religious person looking at signs and thinking about how the world might work and where God's favor might be, I would think that my church burning down would be a sign of maybe things are not going right. How did the church conceive of that event?
Well, they were doing renovations, and they were tarring the roof, and the tar caught on fire. Is that the truth? I don't know. That is the story that we were told. They really just believed that it was a mishap in construction. And then we went on, like I said, we went to a few different hotels around our local city. And then we built the current cult that is here in Sherwood Park in a business area. The cult is right behind our local rec center here. It's gated. It has 3 layers of barbed wire, but there was no big story about it. It was just middle of construction. It burnt down. We have to find a new place. So we're going to go to hotel rooms, and then we're going to build our own new place.
That's fascinating. I would have been, that's a very logical explanation, and I'm, but I would have been like, God just burned down my church. We need this.
I was a child, right? I was very young. So I just went along with what I was told.
But first, a word from our sponsors, which is you. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. This sort of work is incredibly complex, whether it's my hard-hitting investigative journalism or my interviews with amazing thinkers. Time and again, billionaire companies have tried and failed to shut me down, like the time that AG1 hired the most expensive law firm on the planet to threaten me, only to go on full retreat when I proved that they were lying. When the story came out, the CEO got fired. And I couldn't do this sort of reporting without your help. It means the world to me that you are watching this right now, and there's a couple things you can do to support my work in the future. There's obviously the algorithm part of things where you hit that like and subscribe button down below, but more importantly, I just want you to know that I have this Substack newsletter where premium subscribers can get early access to my work before it comes out here on YouTube and be part of a community who cares about journalism. So please check out that link below. With that out of the way, back to our program. You know, when you were 19 years old, you met a man who is now your ex-husband. What can you tell me about what that relationship was like at that time, and where you were mentally and like planning your life? You know, what happened there?
Okay, so I didn't meet him at 19. Our families grew up together. So my mom grew up with his mom back in Newfoundland. And then actually my ex-husband's dad stood in my parents' wedding. So our family connection is more than just meeting at 19. I was born into the cult, and so was he. And he was actually my childhood crush when I was 8 years old. So we had a crush on each other for a very long time. In the cult, you are segregated, boys and girls, from the time you're 5 years old to the time you're 16. So there is no integration. You're not allowed to be friends. You cannot go to each other's birthday parties. It is girls versus boys. Then when you are 16, you are thrown into what is called the young people's group. The purpose of this group is to find your spouse. It's to find your godly mate. And so when I was 16, my 16th birthday party, I talk about it on my blog. You know, when most people have their sweet 16, my sweet 16 boys were they allowed to come for the first time, and I was cooking, and I was showing the boys that I could, you know, make a meal, and I could clean up, and I could do all those motherly and wifely duties. And, you know, the boys come, and that's what they're looking for. They are looking for a prospect. So I actually courted a different guy for the first 8 months after I turned 16. My ex-husband was courting my cousin. It's not called dating. They call it courting in a religious cult. And then when I was 17, my ex sent me a text message. We all had BlackBerry messengers at the time, and we all had BBM. And he was out of town working, and he sent me a message because we were doing a friend photo shoot with my best friend at the time. And he asked where the location was. And I answered him, and it was from that moment on that like we reconnected from our childhood crush on each other. And a year later, we were married. So we started talking, and then it was January of 2010 that he asked me to be his girlfriend, like asked me out. He asked me out in the cult kitchen. So romantic. 2 weeks after he asked me out, I moved in with the elders, the assistant pastor and his wife of the cult, because my parents had been kicked out.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, my story, there's a lot to it. And then I moved in with the elders, as I said. And so my ex and I, we had we courted, and then we got engaged in October of 2010. March 5th of 2011, we got married. What did it feel like? I mean, that was my purpose, right? I was born and raised to be a wife and a mother. I was not raised to go to school. I was not raised to get an education, even though I wanted one. I love school. I love to learn. I'm a writer by heart. You know, I don't have any professional training. But my whole purpose, my God-given purpose as a Christian woman was to get married. So to be chosen by my ex-husband at 17 years old to be married at 19, I mean, I was peaking. This was what I was raised to do. So I was very excited. I was very hopeful. There was nothing more in life to look forward to than that of marriage and kids. So after we got married, 2 months into our marriage, I remember sitting on a couch and looking at my husband and crying. because I wasn't pregnant yet. And he was like, we just got married. And I said, but this is my next purpose. This is what I'm supposed to do. And what if I can't get pregnant? Like, what if doomsday happens? Like, what if Jesus, what if we're raptured before I get to have a kid? Like, I won't fulfill my purpose. And that was March. June, I got pregnant with my firstborn.
In your blog, you have several posts about what it was like to sort of learn about your sexuality in this context. Can you just tell me a little bit about how we all sort of learn that when we're 16, 17 anyway. But in your context, it was, the stakes were maybe a little higher and the information was a little bit more scarce. How did that work for you?
So, I mean, everyone has sex education in school. My parents wrote me out of it, right? I had to sit in the hallway because I went to public school from grades 1 to 6, and my parents wrote me out of sexual education. I had to sit in the hallway. My mom never had the talk with me. It was very taboo. So the first time I learned about my body was 2 months before I got married. And so there was a group of us that got married within a few months of each other. So the group of us 5 girls, we go and sit with a sister, that's what they're called, of the cult. And she talks to us about the Serena method, which is a natural form of birth control, because birth control is not an option. So we can't use IUDs, we can't use condoms, anything like that. So the Serena method is basically taking your basal body temperature, same time every day, to track your cycle. And she talked to us about what sex was like, what our bodies would be doing. Up until that point, I had my period, but I had no idea what my body was doing. All I knew was that I could now have kids because that's what I was born and raised to do. And so after I got married and I got pregnant with my firstborn, I turned to Google. And that's how I learned about my body. And the education that I have about my body now is just me doing research. It has nothing, and it's me being pregnant 5 times. It has nothing to do with being taught, because sexuality, we are born to be heterosexuals, right? Heterosexual, get married, boy and girl. We do not agree with the LGBTQIA community. That is of Satan. That is forbidden. So there was no even curiosity about myself because it wasn't even talked about. I had no knowledge of it, and education is of the devil. So being kept naive kept me on that straight and narrow path that they needed me to be on.
So in your one of your blog posts that I'd read, there was something, I think it was your pastor gave you something called the Happy Honeymoon Manual, which I immediately tried to find on Google, and I couldn't find it because I wanted to see what was in the Happy Honeymoon Manual. And there was also like something like lingerie parties with like your aunts. It sounded like that sounded like this was like what the group was. How you get the babies. They had to give information. So what can you tell me about those 2 things? What was in the Happy Honeymoon Manual, and what were these parties like?
So before the Happy Honeymoon Manual, which the Terry started in 2011, he actually sat with each couple before they got married one-on-one and had this conversation with them face-to-face. So when I got married, he handed the elder that I lived with this Happy Honeymoon Manual. And it was the night before I got married. And so what they would call, your bachelorette party should be on. The elder I lived with forced me to sit in front of him and read through this manual 3 times. And in it, he talked about, penis, vagina, penetration, certain holes are for certain things. Missionary is the only acceptable position. We don't do things like oral. We don't experiment with those things. He talked about how on the first night, the husband should be asking if the woman is okay as he's, pushing into her. He talked about how sex is not what Hollywood portrays it to be. He talks about how sex is for procreation. It is not for recreational purposes. And so I'm reading this on the night before I'm getting married. I talk about it in my blog. It wasn't the first time I had sex. My ex-husband and my previous boyfriend, we had snuck around. But it was the first time I had ever been exposed to these words and what to expect. And it was going to be the first time I ex-husband and I were alone in a room together without fear of repercussion. And what did that mean? Because the men, I mean, I was kept sheltered. The women are kept sheltered, and we're supposed to have children. But the men are construction workers. So all they have learned is from a construction site. So I had no idea what to expect. I didn't even know what missionary meant, and I wasn't going to Google it. So it was terrifying. I felt extremely exposed reading it in front of this elder 3 times through. But I also was excited at the same time to experience sex with my ex-husband before, doomsday happened, right? Your life is kind of compartmentalized into these experiences. You want to graduate from homeschooling, then you want to get married, then you want to experience sex, then you want to experience having a baby, all before doomsday. That's kind of how we
rush.
timeline.
Yeah, you got things to do, and time is of the essence. I get it. No, that's so you have mentioned on multiple occasions how your parents were excommunicated from the church, and you were also excommunicated from the church. And my guess is that a lot of people were excommunicated from this group. How did that function, that action of kicking people out, function to sort of close the community and sort of act as a method of control?
So, I mean, it was fear-mongering, coercive control, absolutely. My parents were first kicked out in 2010. So my parents actually were not allowed to be at my wedding. I physically told my parents they could not come. And they were kicked out because their marriage, they couldn't get their marriage together. They were fighting all the time. And so the leader, Terry, Terry hated my grandmother. So my mom's mom, he said that my grandma was a very outspoken woman, a very blasphemous woman. That passed down to my mom. My mom was also known as a very blasphemous woman. And then that didn't necessarily pass down to me, but there was that history. They never erased that away from my family. And so what they do is they fill you with fear of Sodom, the outside world, every church service, right? They're going to burn in hell, fire and brimstone's going to happen, Armageddon, all of those things. And if you are not in the cult, you are going to burn with them, right? You don't want that. William Branham had a vision where he was descended into hell, and he said he wouldn't wish it upon his worst enemy to go there. So this was the fear that we were filled with. So what they do is they hang it over your head that they have the men of leadership. So there's Terry, and then there's 4 elders, 1 assistant pastor, and then there's 7 deacons and 7 trustees. So the deacons are known as like the police of the cult, but these men have every right to interrogate your life and critique it and make sure you're on that straight and narrow. And if you're talked to too many times, or there's something that happens in your life, they will kick you out. And that means you're not allowed to return. If you do return, you have to go back on your hands and knees, crying, explaining why you want to go back, what has changed. I mean, I've done it myself. And then for myself, in 2018, the final kick out was because my ex-husband had committed bank fraud. And my ex-father-in-law went to the cult elder and said, this and this and this happened. And my ex-husband got a phone call from the elder, and he said, the Bible says not to do fellowship with a wrongdoer. And that was the final straw for us.
It's interesting. You began this conversation by saying that in the theology, the worst thing that a person can do, murder was even okay, but it was the losing the faith in the teachings that was actually the fundamentally worst thing that could happen. Given that, and given that the pastor would say, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, it's hypocritical at the very least to then kick people out of this church for infractions like bank fraud, which I know that's breaking a law. I don't know exactly what he did, but it's interesting that policing structure is so actually contradictory to the theology that is preached.
So what they're hoping for is that you will go back. is that you'll take that space, that time out to think on things, where you went wrong, and to come back, like I said, on your hands and knees, begging for that forgiveness, to go back. And, then you're at the real bottom of the totem pole, their status totem pole, and crawl your way back into friendships, into relationships, into your spiritual journey. That's what they're hoping for. So like I said, my parents were kicked out in 2010. My dad never went back. Now my biological dad, believes that God speaks to him directly now as his own individual. So my biological dad and I have no relationship because my dad hates that I speak out about the cult and William Branham. My dad is a firm believer in William Branham still and God himself. My mom, however, she came back in 2012 after my oldest was 6 months old. And she begged and pleaded and all of those things. My biological sister, she had been out of the cult for 3 to 4 years previous. She came back on my first wedding anniversary, and she got married 11 months later. That did a spiral of, my mom being hauled into meetings and again called blasphemous and all of those things. So my mom was kicked out again in 2014, and my mom never came back. She had my stepdad, her current partner, they formed a relationship and she found her way in the world. Now, 2018 came for us, and that wasn't the first time I was kicked out. I was kicked out a year previous. This was my ex's 4th time being kicked out. So I had begged and pleaded before to come back. My ex had begged and pleaded to come back, but this time it was different. So I had started questioning myself, what was being preached, and different situations that were happening amongst other people. And when he got the call, I threw an adult tantrum. I cried. I was in this exact room right here where we got the call. And then I wiped it off. And I had hair down past my knees. Women are not allowed to cut their hair. So my hair was really long. I wore skirts. And I looked at my ex-husband and I said, I'm going to cut my hair. And I messaged my hairstylist at the time because I had been able to color my hair naturally. I wasn't allowed to cut it or anything. And I sent her a photo of a haircut. And I said, can you do this? And she said, well, I can, but I won't because I know you can't have that done. And I said, no, I'm not in the cult anymore. I'm not going back. I want to cut my hair. And I vowed to myself after that, those events, silently in my head, and I said, from this moment forward, I am going to unlearn, deconstruct, relearn, risk, and lose whatever and whoever I have to. Because if this is what I come from, there has to be something on the other side. And whatever I have to do in between to get to that place, I am going to do. And I have held myself to that vow from that day forward.
That is amazing, right? Because it takes so much strength to go to reject a teaching that you feel in your soul or your heart anyway, that you are going to burn if you do something as moderate as cutting your hair, right? I also saw you sent me a list of the rules that we could go over them, but they were insane, and they include not wearing cat-eyed sunglasses, and eyeglasses, and I just hope that your glasses are cat lenses.
But yeah, they are.
Okay,
they just
good.
have a blue lens, but they have that peak there. Yeah, I did that intentionally.
Sinner right there. But it takes an amount of bravery that is hard for somebody who grew up in Sodom. I'm a avowed pagan. I was born pagan, and not in any religious tradition. My parents aren't in a religious tradition, and there would be no issue with me getting multiple types of sunglasses. But when the stakes are literally burning in hell, it takes a tremendous amount of courage when you actually fully espouse that. So, it says something about you, because not everyone can, break out of that thought bubble, which has been created for you, not only from your birth, but from 3 generations above you, right?
Well, that's the reality. I'll use my mom for an example. She was the first call that I made when I was kicked out, and we hadn't talked for those 4 years because excommunication is one of the fundamental teachings that they teach in the cult. Your family is not your blood family; it's the bride of Christ. So they call each other brother and sister, and that's what you're supposed to cling to. So my mom and I had been excommunicated. She hadn't met three of her grandkids. And after we were kicked out, I called her, and she didn't answer the phone and say hello. The first thing she said to me was, "You've been kicked out, haven't you?" And I said, "Yes." The last 6 years, my mom and I have built a relationship from scratch. She didn't know who I was. I didn't know who she was. And it has not been without bumps. But my mom has double the indoctrination and control that I do. She was in it for 50 years. So as I tweeted last night and put on Threads, last night my mom started swimming lessons for the first time in her life at 56 years old. Because when we would go swimming in the cult, we had to wear jean skirts or long maxi dresses. So we never learned how to swim properly, right? So for her, this is a massive, massive move. And I explain it in my blog, and I explained it in my first blog that I had, like taking these steps, like you said, someone who was born in Sodom, if you will, takes for granted. When we take these steps and do these things, we have bricks attached to our feet, like metaphorically. We feel that we are going to be condemned or something bad is going to happen if we do these things. One of the last blogs I wrote was, when the first time I went to a movie theater, I thought that I was a murderer and the members in the audience were going to burn because I was there, that God was going to burn down Cineplex Odeon because I was sitting there. Because we didn't grow up with TVs. We weren't allowed to go to movie theaters. So the first movie theater we went to, my ex chose Deadpool. And so I say, I'm like, Ryan Reynolds has the majority of the population drooling over him. Ryan Reynolds turned me into a murderer. I couldn't focus on the movie. All I could hear out of the blur in my head was this man laughing, and he was sitting in front of me. And he brought me back to reality. His laugh would continually bring me back. When in the back of my mind, I was just like, okay, it's going to burn down. Like, everyone's going to die. We're going to die today. We're going to die today. This is the last time I'm going to live. And then this man's laugh would happen. I'd be like, okay, I'm still here. So my mom going swimming, that's a massive, huge step for her. Wearing a bathing suit is a huge step. Cutting my hair, it's super short now. That was a massive step. Painting our nails, piercing our ears, getting tattoos. I have 5 now. Cat eye glasses, wearing pants. I'm wearing pants today. Women are not allowed to wear any garment pertaining to a man. So, all of these things that going bowling, right? We couldn't go bowling because of the disco ball. It was satanic. Listening to music, I remember turning on the radio for the first time in the van and literally thinking that I was going to get in a car accident. God was going to send someone's car to kill me because I turned on a radio station that wasn't Southern gospel music.
And how much of this is still in your consciousness? Because it sounds like your experience of leaving the cult is something like coming out of the deep sea and trying to,
have you ever seen Kimmy Schmidt?
Yes. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first scene of her where she comes out of the ground, out of her bunker, that's what I have done. That's legit what I have done in reality, not a TV show. This is my real life.
Yeah. And so Kimmy Schmidt, for those people who haven't seen it, she was indoctrinated in sort of a sex cult, but lived in a bunker, had been kidnapped. And then she has a very different view of the world. And then she has, a delightful comedic routine. I think she moves to New York City. And
Yes. And she becomes friends. Her best friend is a gay man and all these things, which is amazing. But that is exactly who I was in real life. There's not a day that goes by when I put on pants that I don't think of. It's not euphoric for me. When I paint my nails, I always say I'm experiencing life as a child, but this time I get to remember it. So, when a child takes their first steps, they don't remember when they do it. I get to remember my first steps now. There's not a day that goes by, like when I drink a beer or, I go out with my friends and have a shot. There's not a moment where it's not in my brain that's like, oh, wow. Or, sometimes there are those thoughts that come in as like, is this okay? Is this okay? Yes, of course it is. We're going to push that out. I have been told, I've had people from around the world in different cults, in the Branham cult, who have said, I've been out of it for 25, 30 years. You're showing me that I don't just have to survive. I can actually thrive in life. It's my mom will tell you it is scary because her dad, my grandpa, was the song leader of the cult. And he died when he was 45 years old. And so he died in it. And she will tell me, she doesn't know what her dad is doing. Is her dad rolling over in the grave? Would he still be there if he was alive today? And, she had a complete makeover last year. Her friend nominated her and she was accepted. And she had celebrity stylists come from Ontario, Canada. And my mom had a complete makeover. And like her hair is short and bright red. And, it was a whole thing. And she asked me to come and help her pick a new outfit. And I told her, I said, sure. But I said, I will not go if you buy a skirt or a dress. You have to buy pants. She was like, oh, Breanna. I was like, that's my boundary for you. So we went and she tried on her first pair of jeans. And I will never forget it. The ladies in the boutique started crying. My mom was crying. I was crying. It was the first time in her 50 years of life that she had ever stepped into a pair of jeans. And then when she got the makeover and it all came together and it was makeup, she cried in the mirror. So other women were there and it was just a haircut. And it was beautiful for everyone. My mom started bawling her eyes out. And the stylist said, why are you crying? And she said, I never thought I could be this beautiful. When I looked in the mirror in the cult and I had long hair down to my knees and had to wear skirts below my knees and had to wear shirts up to here, couldn't have a button undone. I hated who I saw because who I felt inside was not showing up in the mirror. And there was never a dream that we would ever achieve it. I mean, oftentimes I would think I would sneak into a makeup store in the mall and be like, maybe they could try to see makeup, but then you didn't. So I always say my purpose in life with my blog is if I can just help one person, it'll all be worth it. It is not to quantify if you are in a cult or not. It's to go out and live life. These small things are massive and life altering. They set us on a whole new path in life that we never knew existed.
So there is a line of thought in the world right now that we all live in these different bubbles of experience, right? Especially engendered by social media. We're all sort of going into our own cults that are enabled by rhetoric that, if you're on Threads or Twitter or whatever, and you say something that violates your group's core ethic, people will get mad at you and they'll kick you out, and you feel like, well, how do I get back into my group? And there is a sense it's nowhere near what you experience, right? But there's like sort of this very minor sort of layer of us all sort of being in these thought bubbles. And because we're in a very topical moment, we're recording this on October 29th. When this releases, the world could be an entirely different reality after the American election that's coming up with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Can you give any big picture thoughts about how your experience is relevant to the experience of like sort of the world right now?
Well, I mean, for America right now, Project 2025 is everything I came from. Mm-hmm. That is the reality. Everything under Donald Trump is what I came from. If you don't think that Donald Trump or with Project 2025 won't seclude women to their homes and not be able to work and anti-abortion, all those things, you're sadly mistaken. Everything, all the control and everything that I was is coming to America if Donald Trump wins. On a grand scale, I always say cults are everywhere. They're everywhere. Not everyone agrees with different scenarios that I call cults, but that thinking is everywhere. If you find yourself that there is one person who controls your every move, you're in a cult. If you are waiting for someone to tell you what to do, you are in a cult. Mm-hmm. We never had free thought. We never had free will. We never had any of those things. So,
did you think you had free thought, though? I mean, did you think that you chose did you think that you chose your chains in that sense? Because I think a lot of people.
I never thought I chose it. Because I was born into it. So at that point, I thought my parents chose it. And again, I thought I was grateful for it, right? I was grateful to be I think one of your questions was, what did I think of the outside world when I was in it? I was grateful to be in something so safe, away from the danger that is Satan and hell of this evil world. Because that's the picture that was painted for me. And again, they say education is of the devil. They keep you naive. My mom would cover our eyes when we'd go into a grocery store so we couldn't see like Miley Cyrus or Selena Gomez on the things. So when you're in it, did I think I was a cult? No, we knew people called us a cult, but we never believed it. We called them crazy. Right? We never thought for 1 second we were a cult. We were like, no, we are safe. We are the chosen people. We will do whatever we're told to do to never go out into that. So when you're in it, and that's what a lot of people don't understand, because I've had people message me and say like, how could you stay in it? I don't understand why you just wouldn't leave. When you are fear-mongered to believe that everything outside of this, like you're going to burn in fire and brimstone, and you're going to live eternity in a place where the prophet said he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy, you will stop at nothing to stay where you are safe and told to believe that you're going to live in eternity on streets of gold.
Yeah. It's, I was just, as you were speaking, a thought came into my mind of a very old religion in America, and I'm going to butcher its pronunciation. It's something similar to Machineanism, and it's before Zoroastrianism. So it's very, very old. And the idea behind it is actually very Old Testament. It's about the forces of good versus the forces of evil. Mm-hmm. And it is this, if you've ever seen Constantine, the movie with Keanu Reeves, where these angels are fighting each other, there's this war in heaven going on. All of that stuff comes from this now very dead religion called Machineanism, where mm-hmm. ultimately it's good and evil fighting to create the world we live in. It was sort of adopted into this stream of Christianity that we live now. And it seems like the faith that you were in is so ancient in a way and so recreated in a new way, but it's still pushing you and pulling you to be part of that war. Like everything is part of this war between good and evil, and every action you do has a symbolic meaning of whether or not you're in the good side or not in the good side. And it just seems very exhausting.
Well, it was very exhausting. And then it came to a point where William Branham said the greatest battle ever fought was in your mind. So that's where, and we were told that God knew our every thought. So, I mean, not just our every move in life, he knew what we were thinking. So imagine having to, when you would think maybe a dirty thought or a bad thought, you're like, oh no, God is going to send me a consequence for my bad thought. So that was the battle that it became under the third pull. It was in our mind. It wasn't so much a physical battle because we had passed that point. We had passed the point of, believing that this was Sodom and we were good. We knew it. It wasn't, we had to be convinced of it. Now it was all in our mind. It was a mind game that they were playing with us. And that's where the mind control came in. And that's where we even mind controlled ourselves. And yeah, it was a good versus evil. But then, like our Terry would say, God's love is not a Cupid's love. It is a hateful love, right? Yeah. So God hated everything outside of those four walls. God was not a kind God. He wasn't a lovey-dovey God. He was a hate-filled God. And he hated everything that had fallen except for our chosen few.
Right. That this reminds me of a biblical passage. It's Matthew 10:34. Do you think that I came to bring peace on earth? I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. It's that metal Jesus that we don't. It's not the Jesus of love. It's the Jesus of vengeance.
Well, it's not even the Jesus of the Bible, right? Like, mm-hmm. Jesus of the Bible was a very socialistic man, right? He came and he was socialism. He said, Jesus loves all the children. He turned over the tables because of the hate that people were experiencing. So what we came from, we didn't even claim to be Christians. Terry hated the word Christian. We were non-denominational, and we weren't even Branhamites. We were our own sect. We were our own people. We were known as the Bride of Christ. One of the questions you asked was like, what are the fundamental beliefs that we came from? Before we were kicked out, and probably even more extreme now, like Zionists, like we were Zionism 101. He goes to Israel all the time. He is best friends, like really close friends with, I don't know if you know a woman named Daniela Weiss. She is one of the head leaders of Zionism in Israel, especially with this genocide in Israel right now. I mean, she's heading that, the Jews and the settlers, and she's, getting young people together to go and settle on the mountains. This is what we became. We have sent hundreds of thousands of dollars over to illegal settlements in Israel to help fund them to buy drones so they can spy on.
Wait, what? This whole thing just took a big turn. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're funding settler movements in Israel with actual cash and sort of military equipment involved.
Yes. Yeah. So, and then our money actually built a playground for one of the illegal settlements. I don't know what has happened since we were kicked out, but we were heavily involved. Daniela Weiss comes to the cult here. She speaks with Terry. She speaks to us. And because she's kosher, like we would buy new pots and pans and our food would all be kosher for her. We have met many Zionists. When I went to Israel in 2007, was it? 2009. I mean, we didn't go to like places like Tel Aviv and experience Israel as it was. We went to settlements. We went to meet these settlist groups. And so to the point that these Zionists, they have big families, right? They have 6 to 8 kids each. Where Terry then started preaching that what the Zionists are in the physical world, we are the same in the spiritual world. So we were aligned with Zionism.
So are they going to be, are the Zionists, was there a big problem because now the Zionists who you can only have 500 people in heaven, there's too many Zionists. How did that get fixed?
The Zionists are a part of the 144,000.
Oh, the extra,
So the 144,000 chosen. So in the end time, in the final days, 2 messengers are going to appear on Mount, I think it's
Sinai?
Yes, Mount Sinai. And it's going to be Moses and Elijah. Elijah is William Branham.
Got ya.
And Moses is going to come, and they are going to bring the word of God that is being preached in the cult here in Sherwood Park to the 144,000. They are going to accept it, but they're going to have to die first.
You're blowing my mind here. Okay. All right. Next, I have a related question, and this might sound weird. So are they actively trying to engineer the end times? Like, is there a movement? So there was this American Life episode that came out like a long time ago, which was about American evangelicals funding a cow fertilization program in Israel to create a perfect brown heifer that can then be sacrificed at the Temple Mount on the end days in order to bring along the prophecies of Revelation. Right. Is this the sort of stuff that you're dealing with here? Is that the reason why there's this alliance between the Zionists and Terry Sproul?
Yeah, it's because Terry firmly believes that the word that he is preaching is what the 144,000, the Zionists, are going to accept.
Whoa.
So they have this bond. They have this relationship. I can say, full consciously, my ex and I never gave any money to fund Israel. We were too poor to give. Mm-hmm. So it brings me peace, honestly. Mm-hmm. It brings me a sense of relief that I know that none of my money ever went to fund that. But, mm-hmm. I mean, it should have, but we just couldn't afford it. But that's what they're doing. They have built this bond. I mean, she's the leader of Zionism she's been on CNN. Like they talk about her, like she's a massive major player in Zionism. And she goes to this cult that I'm from. I've met her. Terry Sproul sits in her home when he goes to Israel. like that is how close they are. That is how aligned they are. And that is something, one of the major beliefs and fundamental dogmas, if you will, that has overcome Terry and the cult and what they talk about. And so when, like I said, when he says that what the Zionists are physically, we are aligned spiritually. That's our spiritual journey. So it's like parallel to each other.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I find fascinating about you. And one of them is, of course, I think why a lot of people get into your blog and your social media profiles is because you left this group, right? And that, and all the personal hardships that you went through. And I think that's where the entry point for a lot of people. But to me, what I am most fascinated about is the window which you can provide into the insane theology of these groups that are incredibly influential. And I would love to know more about how that even like you have the initial scriptures, right? And you have a historical process to get the scriptures. And then you have all of these prophets and these people, different people who interpret the scriptures. And you are now on this like little tiny branch of theology that moves money, that has political influence. And even though it's a small group, it is a window into a way that humans think, right? That humans and that influences them. And I would love to, see more on your blog about that theology, which to you is so obvious, right? You're like, oh, Sodom. Yeah, you guys are in Sodom. And like I was blown away when you first said that in the beginning, because Sodom has obviously these connotations that I'm vaguely aware of because from the Bible, but
Right.
but like exposing that the sort of the twists and turns of that particular theology, I can lap that up all day, but we don't have time to do it because we're already sort of over time. I like to keep these around an hour, and the reason I do that is because I would like all of you who are watching right now to go and check out Breanna's blog. It's not a mommy blog. It is, well, that's the name of it. It is,
Yes.
the name is Not a Mommy Blog. It's on Substack. There are links down below. And are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with the folks who have gotten to this point in the show?
I think my final thoughts are, a lot of people that probably are watching, and maybe yourself included, everyone loves a good cult story. Everyone loves to watch a good cult show. Everyone wants to know what's going on inside of it. There is not a lot of talk or help out there for cult survivors. And that is what my purpose is, and what I am driven to do is to create. Yes, there are there are cult professors and all of those things where they put out things on social media that say, if you check 5 of these 8 boxes, you're in a cult, pay $150 and we can talk more. What people don't understand is that when people leave a cult, like myself, we had to pay tithe and offering, which is 15% of our income at any given point in time. We left extremely poor. We don't have the money to put out for someone to tell us if we are in a cult or not. I want to create something, or if you know of someone who's left a cult, we just need to know that people are there to help us, that we're not going to burn, we're not going to die, because we have lost way too many people to suicide, and way too many people end up going back. So my whole purpose in sharing my story and talking about these things is not so people can get, all giddy about what's happening on the inside. It's to be like, there's a harder path on the outside. And I just want to bring that awareness to everyone and to anyone who hears my story. And if anyone wants to help share it, it's to get that help and that space to people that say, you're safe out here. You're not alone on your journey. I'm here to hold your hand on it. And there's a life that's not just to live, but to thrive in out here. And it's going to be okay. Well, that's my message.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And again, everyone, just go check out her Substack. It's free. And then there's like the subscribing side, which also is on my podcast. And, it's a great thing to do to support people who are going through this. And thank you for the work that you've done. And until next time, everyone, this was Scott Carney Investigates from Pokey Bear, LLC in Denver, Colorado, and Alberta, Canada.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to all of my supporters on Patreon and on Substack who make this work possible. If you want early access and to get your name on the honor roll, please check out those links down below. And, it just means the world to me that you're here. From Pokey Bear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.